Introductions. My name is David Skillman. I am from Sunnova Energy. Sunnova is an energy as a service company. Most people know us from our, here's Brandon. Hey, welcome. Most people know us from our rooftop solar and storage options, but we're providing a lot more than that. We're providing storage and energy management solutions, load controllers, accessory devices like heat pumps, anyway, smart home load management, and also working in the commercial sector now too. So, Chris, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, I'm Chris Diaz. I'm co-CEO of Seminole Financial Services. We're a finance provider based in Tampa Bay area, and we provide construction and permanent debt, as well as some tax equity for solar transactions around the country. We have financed a few deals here in the state of Florida, which is nice to do stuff in our backyard. But we focus on mainly kind of 1 megawatt up to about 50 megawatts in size. So happy to be on the panel today and looking forward to a good discussion.
Great. Brandon?
Thanks, guys. Brandon Oddap from Jinko Solar. I was with SIA National for about 6 years, so been deep inside a lot of tax fights, and like David, former House staffer.
All right, so this is the intro session to the IRA, the overview session. There's another more in-depth pair of panels that discuss more specifics this afternoon. So what I'm hoping that we do is we zoom way out and then get more specific as we go through this hour or so. I would invite, we discussed this beforehand, we really encourage everybody here to ask a lot of questions. What I would absolutely hate to happen is for us to start using jargon and acronyms that you don't understand 2 minutes in, and then you're lost for the whole presentation, the whole panel discussion. So please, just jump in as you see fit, flag our attention, and yeah, we'd like to make this as much of a discussion as possible. So maybe just zooming really far out, like what is the Inflation Reduction Act and what does it mean for our industry? So I think all of us would agree here that this is the single most important piece of legislation for purposes of climate, for purposes of domestic energy production that has ever happened. It's about $370 billion worth of investment in the form of direct grants, in the form of tax incentives to the renewable energy sphere. What does that mean for solar in particular? It means that, at least as far as Wood Mackenzie, the analyst firm, is concerned, we're going to see about 62 gigawatts of additional solar added to the system that otherwise would not have been added without the IRA. So that's like, the equivalent of 62 nuclear power plants just in the form of solar because of this act. We're not just going to see public investment. We're obviously going to see a lot of private investment too. So Wood Mac is anticipating that by the end of the decade, we're going to have something like $320 billion in private capital put into solar, as opposed to about half that had we not had the act. So all of that is to say we are about to see gobs of money going into this industry, both from the public and the private sectors. So that, at a very high level, is what the act is all about. I don't know if you want to add anything before we start jumping into specific provisions.
I have a question if you want to hit on it. So if I'm a solar small business owner, I would look at the new tax credit regime and say, I like the tax credit as it was before. It was reliable and simple. I think the section of the tax code is about 2 pages, maybe 4 for 48. How did we get here in terms of all this complication, and what does it mean for the industry?
Yeah,
I'll start, I guess. Going back to, I got in this space in 2009, and it was just after the investment tax credit was actually kind of extended out for a prolonged period of time. And I thought, wow, this could be something, really give this industry the push that it needs. But then, kind of the tax credit started waning, then we got it extended one more time. But from an investor's standpoint, both tax credit investment and from a debt provider standpoint, money wants certainty. We want to know that there's a long-term view of what's going on. People will come into the space because they have time to understand it and know that they can profit from it for a prolonged period of time. So CO was very, very active over the course of the last few years because the tax credit, with the 30% credit, stepped down to 28, and then it stepped down again, and it was going to step down one more time to 10%. So we're pushing very hard to get this, the tax credit extended in one fashion or another. And what we got was the IRA, which does a lot of things. One, it allows for additional tax credits based on incentives. You know, usually it's the stick. Now we're getting the carrot. We have the ability so someone can go in, their prevailing wages, an apprenticeship allows you to get the 30%. So now, boy, that's impacting jobs and bringing people into the space. Then there's another 10% adder for energy communities and cap landfills and whatnot. So these are areas that may or may not have had someone want to go in and actually do something on that site. Now they're incentivized to do that. The low to moderate income communities, another adder, another 10% that's added on there to benefit the low to moderate income communities. So then, and then the next adder, the transfer, well, not transferability is not an adder, but there was another one in there, my domestic content, right? So now that's pushing for manufacturing. And in addition to the domestic content, now there's another credit to incentivize people to come and manufacture here in the US. So it's really done a great job of, boy, you know, we're at it for a long time trying to get an extension. Now we have an extension that one way or another looks like it could be 10 years unless there's a big change.
Yeah.
It's been very positive, and I think a lot of hard work has gone into it and really sets the table for the next 10 years.
Let me add on that answer to your question. Yeah, I think so it's a substantial piece of legislation, right? It's like something like 700 pages. But I think the reasons we needed this type of transformational legislation are twofold. One, as Chris was saying, we had a piecemeal process for extending these investment tax credits and production tax credits. So, and let me just zoom out, by the way, and just define investment tax credit and production tax credit, right, for everybody. So, production tax credit says you install a renewable energy system, say a solar system, we are going to say that for every kilowatt hour that you produce, you can multiply that by 0.3 cents per kilowatt hour, and you get to take that amount off of your tax bill every year for the next 10 years. So in inflation adjusted and with, you know, a rising base production tax credit, that comes out to like 2.6 cents per kilowatt hour. So you multiply that by the kilowatt hours you produce, that becomes a discount on your tax bill. The investment tax credit, right, is it doesn't take place over many years. It's all in one go. So you spend $30,000 building a system, you get a 30% tax credit on that. So that's $9,000 discount on your tax bill that year. And then there's a similar, so those are commercial production tax credit and investment tax credits. And then there's a residential clean energy or solar energy credit, which is also 30% of the cost of installing the system. And that is for the benefit of the homeowner as opposed to a business. So yeah, I mean, those were expiring. They were set to expire in 2034. This gave us a 10-year runway on all of those credits that I just mentioned. And they don't phase out until 2034, or if we don't hit our 75% reduction in carbon goals, then they go even further. So it was nice to have the stability of that runway for the industry. But there's also just a lot of provisions in the Act, which maybe aren't so of great interest to people in this room, but they target forgotten communities that were being left behind in this energy transformation. So low income and disadvantaged communities. That's why we have a new bonus on the investment tax credit and the production tax credit. We want to incentivize people to go into these neighborhoods. There are specific grants. You know, there's like a $27 billion greenhouse gas reduction fund grant, a big chunk of that, $7 billion of it, can be applied for by tribes and territories and local governments. And it's for them to put that money into low-income and disadvantaged communities to build out renewable energy. $7 billion just, I should say, that $7 billion chunk of the greenhouse gas reduction fund is just for rooftop solar, storage, and associated upgrades like panel upgrades, like roof upgrades. Yeah, go ahead.
Specific to that, this is a wonderful thing. However, what I found is most of these municipalities are requiring that the installers are bonded. So there goes everything you saved, because you got this lovely grant. Now you're going to work with companies that are going to be way more expensive than your local installers are going to be.
Yeah, I don't.
Each other out.
That might be a requirement in the grant itself, but I wouldn't know for sure.
Yeah, and
I don't think
A lot of these municipalities are, there are some now that I work with where even though the city says we recommend that the installer be bonded, we don't require it.
Yeah, just to be clear, I don't know that this is for the greenhouse gas reduction fund because the application process for that doesn't begin until June of this year. So states and tribes and municipalities are going to start applying for that in June. And they have to, as part of the application process, discuss how those funds are going to be distributed. And look, I really don't know, actually, what the process is going to be and what the EPA, who is overseeing that money, is going to require. But yeah, it's going to be probably different all over the country, to be fair.
There are lots of grants out there. There's the REAP program for rural energy assistance.
Yep.
Right,
And
that's a $1.7 billion grant program.
Yep. That had a big plus up. And then this the new low-income communities adder is sort of distributed as kind of a block grant program.
And as we talk about adders, really, there's a 30% tax credit that's kind of the baseline here, and then the credit could be 40, 50, 60% as you add these different components to it. So right now, the tax credit makes up 35% plus or minus of the capital stack. So how does a 30% tax credit make up 35% of the capital stack? Well, typically what happens is the investor will pay like $1.10 plus or minus for the tax credit, but they get losses, depreciation, and cash flow off of that. In return, the developer gets the cash. One of the other nice things you talk about municipalities is that they've done within the IRA is this concept of direct pay, which now, before, nonprofits, municipalities could not benefit from the tax credit. So you were less likely to get them to own a system. Now they're able to, through direct pay, get the benefit of the tax credit. So now the municipalities, nonprofits can own the systems and still get the benefit off of the tax credit.
I have a nonprofit that wanted to go ahead, did not find any documentation that says specifically how this is all going to work.
So we're waiting on guidance. There's different components that have come out. We've gotten guidance on low to moderate income. We've gotten guidance on energy communities. We're waiting on guidance for the domestic content. We're waiting on guidance for direct pay. And we're also waiting on guidance for this concept of transferability. We all expect or hope that within the next 2 months, we'll have that guidance, so then, these projects can start moving forward.
Your frustration in the administration's implementation of this process is shared by the people on this stage. It is a lot. In their defense, I know that they're holding meetings on the domestic content bonus, the low-income bonus. They're doing this daily, and there's a lot of stakeholders who want their ear, so it is.
Prospects ask, when are they going to have, I said, I don't know, I keep going to the same websites that you do, and I can't get to anything concrete, I wish I could.
Yeah. Let me just, can I just back up again and just explain to people what the importance of the transferability and direct pay changes, in case people are not familiar with these. So, yeah, as Chris was saying, there's a lot of companies that maybe they want to be incentivized to install solar, but they don't have the tax appetite, right? The tax credit at the end of the year is worthless to you if you're paying $0 in taxes. So what this says is, or that the IRA did, is it created a refundable tax credit. So if you are a tax-exempt organization, if you are a tribe, if you are a state government, if you're a local government, if you're any subdivision of a government, now you can take advantage of these tax credits in the form of the government directly paying you in cash what the value of that tax credit would have been to you if you were a tax-paying entity. And in addition, companies that maybe aren't tax exempt, can't take advantage of the direct pay benefits of the Inflation Reduction Act. Maybe they don't have enough income. Maybe you're a growing company, you don't have a tax appetite. Traditionally, you would have had to rely on a tax equity partner, somebody that you partner with that does have that tax appetite, and then through that partnership, they can take advantage of the credit. Well, now you don't necessarily have to do that anymore, because you can sell your tax credit that, again, you don't have the tax appetite for cash to another company who wants it. So like if they have a $100 tax bill, or if you have a $100 tax credit, they can buy it from you for $95, and then they get the benefit of that $5. And you don't have to report that $95 as income. They don't have to report the $5 benefit to them as income, as any kind of imputed income, and everybody wins. So this is a new provision that allows companies that didn't otherwise have a use for the credit to take advantage.
Is that same benefit allowed to homeowner-financed solar?
Great question. So no, and we should distinguish what the general difference is between a commercial tax credit and the residential tax credit. So the commercial tax credits, that's the Section 48 investment tax credit and the Section 45 production tax credit. Those are only available to businesses, right? And that can be on a TPO system, a third-party owned system. Say Sunnova, puts a system on a homeowner's roof, and it's a lease. That's a TPO system. Sunnova would be able to take the commercial tax credit because Sunnova owns that system. It's also, the commercial tax credits are also available to businesses that finance the purchase of their, or buy in cash, whatever, however they choose to own it, that business can take advantage of the commercial tax credits. The Section 25D residential credits, do you want to report?
Yeah, so is that what the business can take advantage of the tax credit and say, okay, maybe I can't use it, I can sell it to another party?
Yeah, let me.
Or maybe at a 95% or at a 5% discount, and then I get cash for that from that business, and that money is not going to be taxable in my books for that year or the following year? Is that how that would work?
Yeah, so only for commercial tax credit eligible systems, so systems that a business owns, either through a TPO or.
Right, so if I'm leasing, right,
Yeah.
as a company, then I can claim the tax credit from that homeowner's install. And then as these accumulate, if that tax credit is going to be way bigger than my tax bill, I can then sell the surplus to another to like whatever random entity, or do they have to be in the business?
No, they do not have to be in the business. I don't know that you can break up the credit in the way that you're describing. I would welcome comments on that. But yes, you could sell that credit that you cannot take advantage of, that Section 48 investment tax credit, for cash to another entity in whatever business, whoever can take advantage of it. Now, there's going to be brokers that are going to be facilitating that transaction, right? But before I also just want to address the other part of your question, which was the Section 25D residential tax credit. That is just for homeowners that purchase their systems, either cash or financing. They can take a 30% a 30% tax credit on the cost of that system, but they cannot transfer that credit. The transferability only works for the commercial tax credit. So if that customer does not have the tax appetite, if they do not pay taxes, they cannot take advantage of that credit in any way.
They can carry it forward still, but, it's.
Could carry it forward to a future tax year where you did have a tax appetite if you're the homeowner, but in that given year, right, you would not be able to take advantage of that.
But it's only, was it 5 years that you can carry it forward?
I think that's for the commercial tax credit.
Actually,
Oh,
it's
it's
20
20,
years
okay.
that you can carry the commercial tax credit forward, 1 year backwards. Under the old guidelines, I don't know if that's changed or not with this new IRA.
It could get redefined, but that's at least how it stands today.
Yeah.
Was there a question over here? Okay, sorry.
Why would somebody want to pay cash for that?
Why would someone want to pay cash for the tax credit? So well, there's a benefit there, right? So if and you have to be able to utilize the tax credits. There's these, we're not going to get into a big tax discussion, but there's passive loss rules. So if you or I wanted to take the tax credits and buy them from somebody else, I couldn't utilize those tax credits because I don't have the passive losses that I would need in order to take advantage of it. So typically it's a corporation or, and we see, like, you know, anybody like Fortune 100 companies, there's large banks, there's insurance companies that are all buyers of these tax credits. So they buy the tax credit because there's an inherent return in that for them. So they're getting a 10 to 15% return on their investment through the tax credits, through losses and depreciation, and through cash flow. So that's why they're willing to pay $1.10 for one tax credit, because the tax credit only offsets $1, right? So if I spend $1 for a tax credit, I'm getting $1 worth, that's it. If I'm buying losses, depreciation, and cash flow, now the value of that's maybe $1.20, and I'm only paying $1.10 for that. On the transferability, what's happening is when you are transferring that directly to an end user of the tax credit, the pricing, it hasn't transacted yet. I think the pricing is going to be closer to 85 to 90 cents because I still want my 10% return. And all I'm buying is $1 worth of tax credits. I'm not getting losses, depreciation, or anything else. So it's going to be somewhere between 85 cents and maybe as high as 95 cents when the market matures that people are willing to pay for $1 worth of tax credit.
But if you've got a broker involved, the broker's going to probably buy it at 75 cents, and you turn around and sell it at the 85 cents?
Well, that's, the broker will have a spread in there. I don't think it's quite that big, but we're still waiting for the guidance on the transferability because it's one transfer. You can only transfer it one time. You can't send it to somebody and they send it to someone else. So in a typical structure where there's a syndicator involved, what happens is the syndicator sources the deal from the developer, reaches out to the big corporate investor, and then the syndicator in the middle puts the structures together, asset manages it, makes the transaction happen between the parties, and they take a little spread in between. It's not that clear now, and once we get guidance, we'll know a little better how that transferability, can there be an intermediary that can underwrite it and can asset manage it, and they get they form an entity, the credit goes to that entity, and then it gets transferred out. How that's going to take place, there's a speculation around it, but no one knows for sure. I listened to a podcast, and there are, I believe, 1 or 2 people that say they've transacted on it, but I bet from a legal perspective, those documents have so many outs and so many stuff. It's just, I like to transact on certainty of what's going on, so when I know what the playing field is, then I move forward. So we haven't transacted on transferability yet. That's why we're very anxious to get a hold of the guidance, so now we can start moving. Same thing with direct pay. And I think I wanted to ask a question of the audience. Of the people that are in this room that are developers, are you developing outside of the state of Florida? Is anyone here that's doing stuff outside of the state of Florida? Okay, so we have maybe 2, 3 people. Of the developers sitting in this room, how many of you only develop here in the state of Florida? So probably about the same. So the rest of you, I guess, are involved one way or another. But the state of Florida has some unique rules, let's call them, laws. So you can you could go to most states and you could get what's called a power purchase agreement or a PPA with a business, retail center, or wherever. And that's an agreement for you to sell them power and them to buy the power from you. And the utility doesn't have to be involved just only through interconnections, but not involved in the transaction per se. In the state of Florida, only independent power, utility power producers or co-ops can basically sell power. So you can't just go out in the state of Florida and sign a PPA up with whoever's next door or this hotel. You're going to have to sell them the system. They can buy it, or in a residential, you can do a lease. But that's where Florida is different than most states. In most states, it's very common to see people have a PPA with the off-taker for a megawatt, 5 megawatts, 10 megawatts, 20 megawatts, and you can't do that here in the state of Florida. So some of these tax provisions, like with the for the co-ops and for the nonprofits and for the munis, that's beneficial for a developer here in the state of Florida to go reach out to those individual entities and encourage them to purchase the system, or to, like in the case of a co-op, they could actually do a PPA with you. It would be very hard. I don't know of anybody, and not that I know everyone, but I don't know of anyone that has a direct PPA with the top 5 utilities in the state of Florida. They typically will develop those on their own. They're usually 70 megawatts or lower because they can rate base that. And so you'll see that around the state.
Can I say one other thing about the changes to the investment tax credit? So in addition to the runway, in addition to the bonuses, which I think we'll probably get into shortly, the investment tax credit now covers new parts of the system. It now covers the cost of standalone storage, provided that storage is at least 5 kilowatt hours. It now covers the costs of the interconnection to the distribution grid. The cost that you pay the utility to get connected to the grid is now subject to the 30% investment tax credit. It now covers the costs possibly of load controllers. The IRA says that microgrid controllers are a type of property that is subject to the ITC, but it defines microgrid controllers in a way that really applies to load controllers on any home that has a 4 kilowatt or higher system. So we're waiting for guidance on that, but likely that cost is covered. The 25D, the residential homeowner credit, also was extended to include the costs of standalone storage as well. That they are not eligible for the costs of if the homeowner pays for interconnection costs. That's not covered. And the load controller is not covered, but.
And when you say standalone, solar doesn't even have to be involved in the storage investment.
Right. If a homeowner buys a 3 kilowatt hour battery or more, and that alone, that is subject to the 30% investment, I keep saying investment, but it's not commercial, the 30% tax credit for the homeowner.
If they're adding just new solar, does that become eligible?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's always been and storage has always been eligible for the ITC, but it was quite complicated. Usually a retrofit situation, or certainly in the case of commercial, there were all these rules about how much power had to come from the 75% cliff, as we referred to it.
The battery had to draw from the panels and not from the grid, otherwise you.
And the industry fought for years to get that fixed, and it just never worked out. So now this is where we wanted to be anyway, standalone.
Yeah, because when you look it up, there's a lot of literature that kind of basically says you can't apply and receive the credit twice. It has to be the original install. It's very clear that if you add storage, you can.
Yeah.
It's a very gray area on if you're just adding solar. Can you, or are you essentially applying for the credit again?
Like if you did storage first, then solar?
No, like so you have a 5 kW array and now you want to add 5 more.
Yeah, well, you can get credits on the additional 5 that you added.
Correct.
Or if you go in, I don't know what the period of time is, but if you go in and repurpose, so you take off whatever panels and add stronger panels to it, you can get tax credits for what you added, the stronger panels. Yeah, and it's the same thing like in wind. I know Florida's not a wind bastion, but like when people go out and repurpose old turbines and put new turbines up, they're able to get the benefit of the tax credit. But the nice thing is a lot of those systems is there's already an interconnection point there, so there's a savings for the developers. And as the technology gets better and better, I haven't seen a ton of people replacing old panels with new panels just to get more production out yet, but I think the technology is getting better and better and better and more efficient. And once it gets to a certain threshold, then I think you'll see a lot of that.
It's starting to happen just because I've had people when they need roof repairs because of Ian or Nicole or whatever. It's like, well, if I have to take it all down, why am I going to put up these Mitsubishi 185 watt panels? I can replace 26 of those with 13 to do sell 400.
Yeah.
Re-roofing has always been allowed. It's just, it's a very gray area. Some companies get away with full re-roofing and, it survives audit. The guidance that's existed for, I don't know, like 13, 15 years is preparation. So like tree removal. Yeah, tree removal, labor, some re-roofing, but usually you're just talking about like the section of the roof that the solar is involved with. But consult your tax professionals,
Yes.
I say.
Got a question over here?
Oh, yeah.
Are there depreciation provisions? There was a rapid depreciation provisions previously on those in the new IRA?
The accelerated depreciation, I'm not sure if they changed that at all.
Still 5 years as far as I know.
Okay.
Yeah.
There used to be a bonus on depreciation in year one.
Yeah, I don't know that got in the new legislation.
Oh, the 199A?
179.
Yeah, I don't know if it's in there.
Yeah, I think that's phasing out. That's left over from
May have already,
TCJA,
yeah.
right? Well, since this is an overview, we should hit a couple more. We're probably going to hit more on the labor and apprenticeship stuff because that's very important to CNI and the CNI panel after lunch. But let's talk about domestic content, David, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so unfortunately, this is also one of those areas where we are desperately wanting some guidance, although you kind of have to, you don't want to wish for guidance too quickly because then it's done hastily. But yeah, so the domestic content bonus is an adder on top of the base investment tax credit. So instead of getting a 30% ITC, you could get a 40% ITC. And the rule in the text of the statute says that if the cost of the manufactured products that are components of your systems that are made in the United States gets you to 40%, then you get that 10% bonus. And that 40% threshold changes over time. So in 2025, it bumps up to 50%, the next year 45%, the next year 50%, and then in 2027, it's 55%. So it rises over time. Unfortunately, I'd say that the text is fairly ambiguous, and I think that our discussions with Treasury, with the White House, have revealed that maybe they're pursuing a rule that gets to an end that they desire, but maybe isn't so tied to the text itself. And so what I mean by that specifically is we're hearing a lot of questions. Let me back up again. My reading of the text and the rule I would envision is that if you got a panel that's made in the United States, regardless of whether the cells come from here or from abroad, the cost of that full panel should count towards that 40% threshold. That's my reading of the statute.
What the industry calls assembly only. So assembly only should qualify.
Well, so the FTA, the Federal Transit Administration regulations, which are cited in the Inflation Reduction Act itself for guidance on how to figure out this rule, says that if you undergo a veritable manufacturing process in the United States, that product that is the result of that manufacturing process is a manufactured product, and you should be able to count the cost of it towards the threshold, regardless of where the subcomponents of that product come from. But, as I said, the more and more discussions we have with White House, the more we're hearing that they want a rule that would incentivize not just the production of panels here in the United States, but one that incentivizes the production of cells and maybe even wafers too in the United States. Now, I think that is an overstep because there's another provision of the IRA, the Advanced Manufacturing Tax Credit, that does exactly that. It gives a credit for the production of cells in the United States, production of wafers, all the way down to raw materials. So that is what that is for. But we're hearing White House say, well, you know, again, they're not saying this directly, we're just sort of reading in between the lines, that they really want a rule that says in order to take advantage and apply the cost of that panel made in the United States towards that threshold, it's got to have maybe US cells. It's got to have maybe US wafers even, which would mean that if that rule were put in place, then most people wouldn't be able to take advantage of it for 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 years, depending on the other components of your system and how you want to try and get to that threshold. So I'll say there's a lot of uncertainty right now about what the rule is going to be and what systems are going to be eligible for that 10% bonus.
So the bottom line, if you go cells are required from day one, it's essentially a worthless credit for the first, let's call it 3-4 years. Could be longer. You never know how these projects get off the ground.
Yeah, it would depend on what Treasury says about the other components of a system. Like it's possible that they apply this really strict standard as to what panels you're gonna be able to take the full cost and apply it to the threshold. But then maybe, I don't think this will happen, maybe they say, well, if the battery is made in the United States, regardless of the subcomponents, then you can count the full cost of it towards the threshold, in which case maybe the cost of your battery and maybe a few other things gets you to that threshold and you can take the bonus. But
What about phasing it in? Like as long as it's assembled for, call it like the first 4 years, and then you have to do cells, things like that.
I think that's something that we think Treasury is considering. I think it's like legally pretty dubious and would be open to a challenge, and that's not what we want. Like we don't want to have this, we want certainty. We need to make decisions in where we invest and what suppliers we use, and we don't want these credits rolled back 2 or 3 years from now. So I'm a little bit nervous about a phased-in approach, but I do think that's a possibility.
Yeah, that's why all this guidance is important, because like on the LMI component to these adders, everybody thought it was going this way, and all of a sudden we got something way different than what everybody thought. With the energy communities, it was pretty close to what we thought it was going to be. So with domestic content, I mean, there's just, you see from this discussion, you can see that there's a lot of different thoughts about where it's going to shake out. So it's hard for an investor or a lender to, you know, move forward assuming that, yes, you're definitely going to get that. You make provisions in the documents. If you are able to get that, then that could, you know, you would adjust the tax credit investment or what have you, but it's very difficult to move forward. And, you know, I've talked to a lot of people that have been asking about it, and what ends up happening from the developer's perspective is if you believe that you're going to get certain adders, then you can go out and negotiate maybe a cheaper PPA price or an increase in the cost of your system. But if you assume it and you don't get it, now you have a system that doesn't work. So that's why you don't want to get too ahead of your skis and start assuming, well, we're definitely going to get that, we're definitely going to get that, until you know for sure.
And I just want to clarify, I think we may have already said this, but these bonuses, the 10% bonus for systems that use sufficient domestic content, the 10% bonus for systems that are placed in energy communities, which I think we'll get to next, and the 10 to 20% bonus for systems placed in low-income communities, those bonuses only eligible for systems that take advantage of the commercial tax credit, not eligible for the homeowner on the Section 25D residential tax credit.
Yes, sir.
You can. So you could, in theory, this will never happen. In theory, you could get a 70% investment tax credit on the price of your system, or PTC. So that's 30% base, 40 for the domestic content, 50 for low income, 50 for energy community, and 20% for low income. So, and that would get you to 70. Well, actually, kind of.
Yeah, well,
we're almost there.
There was a slide, I know Tony Grapponi's speaking on one of the panels after lunch, and their last conference, they had a slide that kind of layered it all in and showed where the 70%, he may be willing to share that slide if he can. But think about that. So if you have 70% tax credit, Right now, you have a 30% tax credit. That makes up 35% of the capital stack. So the other 65% is made up of debt and equity that you're putting in. Now you flip to, if you get as much as a 70% tax credit, that's going to be probably 75 or close to 80% of the capital stack. So all you need is, this much debt to get you over the hump. That's why people would be willing to go really aggressive on a PPA price or, pay a little more for a system. I mean, the whole reason is, right, this big incentive, because buying panels and stuff that's manufactured here in the US is more expensive. So you're trying to incentivize the developer to pay a little more for the domestic content through the tax credit. So again, it's the carrot versus the punitive stick that in the past that we've gotten.
Yeah. We should touch on the energy communities. I think we're running out of time. So.
Okay. The audience demands a question.
Yeah, is there, and I think it would be super helpful to have a specific resource that will help qualify a specific project, like by zip code, it qualifies for this, by, it qualifies for this, and by this, so it could be like a place where we can go and,
Yeah.
and check those things.
So we have such a magical, it's in production. So you obviously don't need to plug in a zip code for domestic content bonus, right?
No,
But you do for energy communities, SIA, it's premium content on SIA's website, but it is an interactive map where you can choose the layers that you want to apply, and you can plug in an address and see whether it fits the description. Now, that for the time being, that map only works for the energy communities bonus because we do not have full guidance yet on the low-income community bonus. Now, I think they have a separate map that does make predictions, but again, these are just predictions at this point. And the other, we got to move into a description of the low-income community bonus because, and I'll say this again in a minute, but you have to apply for that one in advance. It's different from all the others. You can't just go into a low-income community and expect to have that 10 to 20% bonus. You need to apply to Treasury with the address in advance because there's a cap on how much they're giving out, how many projects are eligible for that low-income community bonus. Yeah.
Just quickly, do you know if there are any restrictions or benefits for the size of the system?
No, I do not think so.
Yeah, as long as it's a commercial system, then all these would apply, all the adders could apply.
Something about 1 megawatt?
So that is we'll get into that when we discuss labor and apprenticeship standards, but in order to get to the increased base of 30% investment tax credit, if you are a system above 1 megawatt, then you need to adhere to certain prevailing wage and apprenticeship standards, which again we'll discuss in the afternoon. If your system is above 1 megawatt, you get the 30% base ITC without regard to prevailing wage and apprenticeship standards. They do not apply.
If you're under 1
Did I say that wrong? If you're under 1 megawatt, you do not need to worry about the prevailing wage and apprenticeship standards.
Base 30%, you don't have to worry about it. Yeah, the base 30%, I guess.
If you're under 1
If you're
megawatt.
under 1 megawatt. If you're over 1 megawatt, then you have to prevailing wage and apprenticeship applies.
Sorry, I missed
So
that.
what does the energy community credit adder mean for Florida?
Not very much, frankly, because there are 3 different categories of energy communities. One is brownfields, which the recent guidance said is any parcel of land that a state or federal agency designates as a brownfield, or any parcel that you conduct a phase 1 or phase 2 environmental site assessment on and you find contaminants. So that's the first category of brownfields.
Like a retired chemical plant site or something?
Yeah, or again,
like that.
gas station, or, yeah. The second category is the one that I think is most relevant for Florida, which is census tracts that had a closed coal mine after 1999 or a closed coal-fired power plant after 2009. The DOE and SIA both have maps on their websites that identify the census tracts that have these closed coal mines and closed coal power plants. It's census tracts that have those, and also adjacent census tracts are eligible for energy communities. And there is a list. I mean, I wrote it down actually just because I ran it last night. Like, there's areas around Panama City, Jacksonville, Lakeland, Tampa, Homosassa Springs, and Martin that all have closed coal facilities. So those are places where we should be targeting in Florida to get that 10% bonus. There's a third category. We're running short on time. It's not. I ran the search. There's a third category that's based on historic employment in oil and gas and coal. But the DOE has maps for that too, and none of the statistical areas in Florida are eligible for that. So should we get
We're good?
into low-income
Yeah,
bonus with our?
Yep, LMI adder?
Yeah. Should I take the lead? Is that
Yeah,
okay?
go
Please.
right ahead.
Okay, so this is a 10 to 20% adder, 10 to 20% ITC bonus. You get the 10% bonus if you place your system in either Indian lands or in low-income communities. And low-income communities are defined by reference to another part of the code, but generally they include census tracts that have greater than 20% poverty rates, or where the area median income is below 80% of the statewide median income. So those are location-based. That's the 10% credit is location-based. The 20% bonus is for systems that are placed either in federal affordable housing program places, so that includes Violence Against Women Act shelters, that includes certain Native American housing program facilities.
Low-income housing tax credit programs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a number, and Treasury is going to define them further, but federal affordable housing programs.
This is on the commercial side, right?
This is only, yeah, these are only commercial investment tax credit and production tax credit. There's also a 20% bonus available if you, so we're still under the umbrella of the low-income tax credit bonus. A 20% adder available if you place the system anywhere, but you confirm that 50% of the benefits of that system, like the energy savings on utility bills, go to people whose household income is, is below 80% of the area median income, or 200% below the poverty line. So you have to income verify the subscribers to this program to get that bonus. Now, the problem with the 10 or 20% low-income community bonus is that there's a cap. Only projects up to 1.8 gigawatts cumulatively per year are eligible to take advantage. Nationwide are eligible to take advantage of this bonus. That should be a lot of projects, frankly. I mean, it should be tens of thousands of projects. Unfortunately, the guidance that came out at the beginning of the year made clear that we're going to only have a few hundred, maybe 1,000 projects a year that are going to qualify for that bonus. So it's going to be pretty worthless. The problems with it are that a few. I mean, one, Treasury's not going to open the application process until the tail end of this year for 2023 projects. Systems that are placed in service before you apply to Treasury are ineligible, meaning you sign up a customer today or in January of this year, you have to wait until the end of the year to apply for the credit with Treasury, get the credit, and then you can put the system in service, which makes no sense. No one's going to do that. And also, Treasury has set forth these additional criteria for who they're going to favor in this application process. And it's very clear that they have a philosophical agenda that they want to favor mission-driven community organizations. They are not looking for big developers to take advantage of this credit. They want locally owned community organizations to be able to.
Small businesses?
Maybe. I mean, I doubt that systems placed on small businesses will qualify. I think this is only going to be for residential customers.
Yeah, and like you said, there is a map if you do want to sort of
Yeah.
dig into it.
But SIA has that map.
Oh, yeah, and it's premium content.
I believe so, and it is. Again, it's only going to be of so much value, right? Because you're going to have to, you're going to look at this map, and then you're going to have to apply. You're going to have to leave your customer waiting before you can, and then you have no certainty whether or not you're going to be eligible for the bonus.
It's unfortunate because it's a community that the law wants to serve.
It's incredibly unfortunate because the legislative history made clear that they expected a flood of developers to be going into these communities and people signing up left and right. And it's unfortunate that people in Department of Energy and in the Treasury have a very different agenda of what this should look like. Yeah,
and that, when I talk about, proceed with caution until you have certainty, that was one of them that, nobody had, I didn't hear anyone say any of the provisions that were in there, they thought that was what was going to be in there.
No.
And all of a sudden, big surprise.
And people gambled.
Yeah,
people
that's
gambled.
right.
They went into communities that had a 20% poverty rate, and there's plenty of those. And they went in there hard, and then they realized, oh, we've already placed these systems in service. They're not eligible for the bonus.
So there's a few things post-IRA that sort of SIA National and its members want to work on in terms of tweaks to the bill that would make it more usable. This is probably one of those.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
One more question is,
Yep.
you're talking about systems that go to homeowners, but this is under the commercial provisions. So the tax credits are actually for the installers?
So these would only be the bonuses. All of the bonuses are only available, as you said, on the commercial tax credit. So these would only be TPO residential systems for the low-income community bonus, or community solar systems, right, that have residential subscribers.
Or any of the bonuses, like direct homeowner 25 cap D financed, not eligible for any of it.
Not eligible, the homeowners are not eligible for any of the bonuses that we've been discussing, domestic content, energy communities, or low-income community bonus.
So
but I think her confusion is, I just said Treasury for that low-income community bonus, which is only available as an adder to the commercial tax credit. I just said, well, that only residential systems are going to be able to take advantage of that. That sounds contradictory. What I'm trying to say is, it's the commercial tax credit on a residential property or for residential subscribers.
So the concept of community solar, where you go build let's call it 1 megawatt system somewhere over here, and then people subscribe to it. So it's not panels on people's roofs, but they're still getting credit for the power.
Well, you could do panels on the roof, you would just have to lease them to them, right? That's the other way you can.
Yes.
Or instead of building an actual little solar farm, you can just put them on the roof, but they would have to lease them.
Right.
And that way, as a company on the commercial side, it can still qualify for that.
Correct.
Do I get that correct?
Well, wait a minute. So you're saying if you put a system on on someone's house, and you're leasing it to them, that qualifies for the residential credit?
That would be a TPO system, and so they would be eligible for the commercial.
Oh, they get the commercial?
Yeah.
So you got
Okay.
that option, or you got the option of building basically a mini solar farm under a gigawatt to be able to qualify. Do I understand that correctly?
Well, the last part, I think you said, isn't.
Under a gigawatt, right?
No, there's no gigawatt cap. If you stay under the 1 megawatt threshold, then you don't have to worry about prevailing
Not
wage.
extra provisions, but the credit still stands without cap.
That's right.
Got it.
Yeah. Maybe I'll just repeat this one more time because I'm worried people are confused. So the commercial tax credit, which is the only tax credit that is eligible for these bonuses that we've been discussing, is available to businesses that own their systems. So like a small business puts panels on their roofs, or it's available on residential systems that are TPO, that a company owns and leases, or in other states enters into a PPA with the residential customer. If the residential customer owns their system, they are not eligible for the commercial tax credit. They are not eligible for the bonuses. They are only eligible for the residential tax credit, which is also 30%, but it is not the residential credit is not transferable. It is not eligible for any of the bonuses.
Yeah, no direct pay, but the labor and apprenticeship stuff we'll talk about after lunch also does not have to apply to those residential finance or homeowner finance tech.
Right. No cap on the commercial tax credit on the system size. The 1 megawatt threshold is just important to decide whether or not you need to meet prevailing wage and apprenticeship standards. If you go over 1 megawatt, you do need to meet them. If you stay under, don't worry about them.
Yeah. If you're doing third-party owned, I hope you've been doing it for a while, because these tax structures have existed on homes for some time. A lot of companies have been doing those. This just adds a whole bunch of layers of incentives that didn't exist before for those projects.
Yeah.
Could I clarify, prevailing wage, so automatically they qualify for that extra 10% if they're under a megawatt?
No. Okay, sorry. So think about it this way. There's a base of 30%,
Yeah.
and then the bonuses are 10 to 20% on top of that.
Right.
In order to get that base 30%, if you're under 1 megawatt, you get that base 30% automatically. If you're above 1 megawatt, in order to get that base 30%, you need to meet prevailing wage and apprenticeship guidelines. Otherwise, the base is actually down at 6%. So you get a 5x multiplier to 30%. That becomes your new base if you are either under 1 megawatt, or if you're over 1 megawatt, if you meet those prevailing wage and apprenticeship standards.
There's no prevailing wage bonus?
No.
Got it.
Yeah, you'll see it referred to that way. That's not what it is. Yeah. Yeah. Because some people refer to the ITC is now 6%, and you get a 24% bonus for meeting prevailing wage. It just confuses everything. We just call it 30%.
I think we need to break.
Yeah.
Why don't we take one last question?
What was that?
Does on the commercial, for the commercial side?
So the losses and the depreciation in current structures go with the tax credits if it's a partnership flip. If you're using an inverted lease, you can bifurcate the losses and depreciation. So what would happen in an inverted lease structure is the investor gets 99.99% of the tax credits, and then they get 49% of the losses and depreciation, and then the developer keeps 51% of the losses and depreciation. With transferability that we're talking about, the losses and depreciation will stay 100% with the owner of the system, the developer, whoever owns it, and then they will sell the credit, just the tax credit, to whomever is going to be the buyer.
One more quick question.
Sure.
Just to commercial customer wants to go solar on, say, a TPO roof, right? And he's covering 50% of the roof. Can they claim 50% of that roof cost as a tax credit?
As part of eligible basis.
Can you repeat the question for everybody?
So you're asking if someone comes in and puts a system on and they have to re-roof, if it's 50% of the roof, can the cost of that re-roofing underneath the system be considered eligible basis for the tax credit? I don't know, really. I haven't had that come up, so I'm not really sure. That's a tax attorney or an accountant question.
It depends.
Yeah.
A full re-roofing for a 50% coverage on the solar, doubtful, but you could certainly justify some portion of that. And if it's a relatively new roof, also if there's a membrane involved or something, like if we're talking about bifacial for reflection, some of that helps, but it's just facts and circumstances. It depends.
All right.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. We'll come back after lunch.